I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of premium board games, or I should say the expectation of board games as a board gaming enthusiast, but more and more premium is becoming standard. And once things flip, once we cross that line, gaming companies are going to have to deliver. It's kind of like back in the day when you actually had to pay for bandwidth on your phone, and they'd give you something ridiculous like 250 megabytes, like at the dawn of time, and you're paying like $50 a month. And then at some point, it got bigger, it changed, and now it's like free data. Would you ever go for a data plan if I had to pay like $50 for a gig a month or something crazy like that? I mean, maybe in some plans, but this idea that all of a sudden in the industry, things flipped very fast and you had to either get on board or you were left behind because the expectation changed. The expectation changed. Now, being in the board gaming hobby for some time, this is the switch I first noticed. And it'd be interesting to get your take on that. I noticed it honestly with Zombicide Modern, Zombicide First Edition. And maybe this was just when I became aware of it or things were switching. This idea where a board game, you've got the board, you've got some tokens. If miniatures were involved, the miniatures were usually the primary characters. So the heroes of the game, the actors, the components that the players are going to control. Monsters and other elements, they would be tokens or maybe some sort of marker or cards. Games like this have worked tremendously, perfectly, wonderful to play for a long time. Zombicide was the first where we're just going to bomb everything with miniatures. Like, yes, you can get behind the zombie theme. You can get behind the mechanics. It's a lot of fun to play. But not only are we going to give you miniatures for the primary characters, we're going to bomb the table with miniatures for everybody else. And we're going to give you like 100 of them. Now, that line is blurred. If I look at a game like Conan, and I'm just going to leave it there because if you've been following my channel, you know I love Conan. You know I love Aliens versus Predator, dungeon crawlers. Conan the board game, fantastic board game. Fantastic with the narrative and the mechanics. I'm just going to leave it there. But you set up Conan, you've got 4 players playing Conan. You just walk by, okay, you're like, yeah, it's Conan, but is it a board game or is it a miniature skirmish-based game? Is it like almost like a war game, a fantasy type of war game thing? So more and more we're seeing where this idea of miniature war games would have been like, here's all my miniatures and board games, like you're doing your board game thing. Now you can I can set up God tier, love God tier. I could set up God tier with Zombicide or Dungeon Crawler. I could set it up with Massive Darkness. And you look and it's like, where's that line? So it's been blurred. That was the first real shift where now I think board gaming enthusiasts were looking and saying, I want miniatures. I don't maybe need hundreds of them, but I want miniatures. So now it's pretty rare to find a board game without miniature components. And even the ones that I find that don't have miniature components, they'll be premium standees or colors or tokens. It's a deliberate design factor, and it looks absolutely fantastic. So we have that kind of going on. With miniatures, now what you're starting to see, and I noticed this with Nemesis, and then I kind of saw it with, I was going to say Descent 3rd Edition. In my mind, it's Descent 3rd Edition. You're seeing now where it's, we see it in Bard Song, this idea, we're going to pack you with miniatures. We're going to pack it with miniatures. But the boss of the game, there's going to be the mega miniatures, right? There's going to be, excuse me, these huge, huge miniatures. The scale is increasing. You've got the regular minions, size up, and the bosses are like massive, really, really huge. Fantastic. So we're starting to see that, and in addition to the sculpts. Okay, so now the third switch that I've been seeing more and more, and the two, I'm going to reference 2 games. One is been out for a while, relatively new, Nemesis. We're just looking retail. So it's not even like, Fritz, this is some special Kickstarter deal component, something like these were Kickstarted, but we're looking at pure retail. So Nemesis, sci-fi and space, Bard Song, Dungeon Crawler. looking at these games, what you see is what would previously be premium components are now standard. So you've got fantastic miniatures. The sculpts are easily wargaming quality or above. In terms of Nemesis, I've pulled those in and painted them into my Tyranid army for Warhammer 40K. Games Workshop does not like that. Games Workshop bans that. I could never do that, bring that, play that in a GW store. But the miniatures look fantastic. They diversify my Tyranid army. And fellow 40K players are like, they look at those miniatures. And, it's integrated into the army. And they're like, that's awesome. Where'd you get those space bugs? And I'm like, it's a board game, Nemesis. They're like, what? So we have that premium component. Then we have tokens. This idea of, rather than flimsy cards or cardboard, premium cardboard, plastic tokens, plastic cubes, glass bead markers, stuff that's got premium dice, weighted dice. You're starting to see that packed in. I see that with Nemesis. I see that with Bard Sung. And then the big piece, man, if only Fantasy Flight learned this years ago, storage. If you're a Gloomhaven enthusiast, and I love Gloomy, like before the game even arrived, you're like, Internet, Siri, Gloomhaven, storage solutions. Or you're like, I just paid $100 for Gloomhaven. Fantastic price, absolutely. But now I'm going to spend $150 to organize the thing. So from that perspective, what you're seeing with Nemesis and Bard Sung is custom fitting ways to store the game. Not even just in between pausing missions or campaigns, but everything in this organized box. The miniatures are organized. The components are organized. Character dashboards are organized. This is all standard pack-in. So you're exploring this and you're saying like, wow, right? As little as what? 4 years ago, 5 years ago, this would have been premium. I would have had to purchase something like Bard Sung. The miniatures would have been kind of a mid-tier level if this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And if I loved the game and I wanted to bling it out, then I'm going to spend extra money for the acrylic pack, the upgrades, or upgrading my tokens, third party. Then I'm going to upgrade the dice. Then I'm going to have to come up with some storage solution. I'm either purchasing it third party or making it out of foam board, foam core myself. That's all off the shelf now. Here's the game, put it down, play. It's interesting to see things shifting. The last question, and I think we're still a ways out on this, and I think it's been delayed with the how expenses have risen in terms of manufacturing and stuff, but I think it is a matter of time. Pre-painted miniatures. Not talking the Whiz Kid. I'm talking like solid pre-painted miniatures. Certainly, one of the things with the board game is we're trying to step into that narrative. I love board games because I can play them and step back for a second and see that world and how it's constructed and how it plays and really kind of enjoy that perspective. Painted miniatures do make a difference. Now, some, not all, board gamers are also wargamers. A lot of my games are painted. Some of them aren't painted because I'm playing them all the time, and I'm like, look, I can't spend a month or two painting them because the primary focus, of course, is Battletech and 40K and other aspects. And nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong playing unpainted. But occasionally from time to time, you would see, we saw this with, this was going back, 10 years? Or 8 years? Clusterphobia. Fully pre-painted miniatures. Now, is it wargaming tabletop quality? No. But it's pretty good for what it is. You would see with Nemesis, right? Was it the sun drop, the sunshade, some light shading? Not fully painted, but again, you see options there. You did see with the D&D Adventure series, the most recent ones, here's the core, and then here's the pre-painted. Now, Wiz is only doing that because they also sell the D&D miniatures, but it is still an option. Is it worth the price? We could debate that back and forth. But as soon as I think you start seeing halfway decent pre-painted miniatures, that's going to raise the component. And I would not be surprised in a few years from now, 5, 6. I mean, what do you guys think? Where I'm looking at board games and I'm looking at Kickstarters and I'm like, if it's not pre-painted, then that's like, I'm going to look at a game that's no miniatures, bring your own dice and a couple of flippy cards and some really thin cardboard. Like, no, we're not going back to that. The industry has kind of moved forward. So it's interesting to see how things have evolved with board games and how just the industry has not only exploded, but I think the expectation of what is possible, the expectation of what is expected, that's shifting, that's accelerating. And that's interesting in terms of titles that are up and coming. And when they're released, just what are those going to look like?